She had nowhere else to go, no one to call, no keys to any door in the city. But as her body clenched again with the force of labor, she knew she couldn't stop. Not here, not now, not like this. She was 8 months pregnant, with twins, and barely able to stand. Her car had died just a few blocks earlier. Her dignity had been bruised by too many closed doors, too many people turning away when all she needed was a chance. But none of that mattered now. What mattered was that her children were coming, and they couldn't wait for mercy. Across the street, towering glass reflected gold lights from one of the city's most expensive hotels. A place built for the elite, for gala nights and silk-tied executives. She wasn't supposed to be there. Not soaked to the bone, not barefoot, not carrying everything she had left, in a worn shoulder bag and a womb that held more hope than she dared admit. But she crossed the street anyway, because pain doesn't wait for permission. She pressed one trembling hand against the stone column outside the revolving doors. Her other hand gripped the edge of her belly, willing the pain to slow down just long enough to breathe. She didn't ask for help. She hadn't done that in a long time. But someone noticed. A man in a uniform opened the door. And when he saw her face, what he saw changed everything. Before we begin, if this story moves you even a little, hit that like button and subscribe. These stories take hours to craft, and your support helps us keep sharing stories that matter. Because this story isn't just about her survival. It's about his awakening. It's about a moment so raw, it shattered the walls a powerful man spent years building, and the children whose eyes told him the truth he never expected. From the top floor of the building, he watched her. He hadn't meant to. He'd only glanced at the security feed while finishing a late-night review. But something about the figure outside the glass stopped him. Not her struggle, though that was clear. Not the way she gripped her stomach, or the way the doorman rushed out. No. It was the look on her face. She was in pain, yes, but she held herself like someone who refused to be defined by it. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story. But in that instant, something inside him stirred. A man who had spent years numbing himself with numbers, schedules, and profit. Margin suddenly found himself standing up, without even realizing why. Downstairs, staff were already reacting. The woman had been helped inside, wrapped in a dry blanket, seated carefully in the lobby lounge. She refused water at first. She apologized. For the mess. For the trouble. As if giving birth was some kind of burden she didn't deserve to place in their polished world. When he stepped off the elevator, he didn't speak at first. He just stood there, watching her breathe through the pain, her hand clenched tightly to the armrest. Her hair was wet, her clothes worn, but her presence filled the room in a way he couldn't explain. And when her eyes met his, he forgot what he came downstairs for. Something deep inside him, the part he thought had died when love left his life, began to whisper again. Not loudly, just enough to make him stay. This isn't just a story about a woman in labor at the wrong place at the wrong time. This is a story about timing that saved lives, about strangers who were never meant to be strangers, about two children who, upon entering the world, quietly rewrote a legacy their parents thought was already written. Stay with us, because what happens next will stay with you. The Grandview Plaza towered over the avenue like a monument to excess. Sleek glass panels gleamed under the night sky, reflecting golden lights from its grand entranceway. Bellhops stood like statues beneath a carved archway, their crisp uniforms untouched by even a wrinkle. Inside, guests moved from valet drop-off to velvet-lined check-in desks, barely noticing the polished marble floors beneath their feet. Everything inside the building seemed effortless. Every chandelier was positioned just so, every flower arrangement perfectly symmetrical, every breath of air filtered, perfumed, and prepared for those who could afford luxury in its purest, most silent form. But a block away, someone else was fighting for breath. Valentina Moreau pressed her forehead against the steering wheel of a car that hadn't run in hours. The hood still steamed faintly from its final protest earlier that afternoon, and the heat had long since vanished from inside. She had wrapped herself in every spare piece of clothing she owned, but it wasn't enough. She winced, clutching her stomach as another wave of pressure surged through her. It wasn't time yet, or at least it wasn't supposed to be. She was still a month out, wasn't she? Or had her body finally surrendered to the stress, to the cold, to the exhaustion that blurred every moment into the next? She reached for her water bottle. Empty. Her last real meal had been 2 days ago, a sandwich shared with the kindness of a clerk, who probably didn't know she was sleeping in the parking lot behind the grocery store. Valentina had been careful not to look like she was lingering too long anywhere. She didn't want pity. She didn't want questions. But right now, she wanted relief. A pause. A place to sit and let her body ease out of its spiral. Her babies were not ready. Not yet. She needed just a few more days. Maybe even hours. Another cramp, stronger this time, tightened across her abdomen. She gripped the edge of the dashboard, tears springing to her eyes. Not from pain, but from fear. She glanced up through the windshield. Ahead, the streetlight flickered against the silhouette of that hotel, the one she had only seen in passing, the one with rooms that cost more for one night than she'd earned in a week baking cakes and kneading bread. She'd once made a delivery there. Just once. She remembered the uniformed staff, the thick carpets, the strange silence of moneyed spaces. She'd told herself she'd return one day, not to clean, not to serve, but maybe just to experience it once. That was before everything fell apart. Now she was here again. Not as a guest, not as anyone. Just a woman in pain, with no time left to pretend things weren't falling apart. She pushed the car door open slowly, as if each movement had to be negotiated with her body. Her legs ached from night sleeping curled in the back seat. She pressed a hand to her belly. One of the twins kicked lightly, just a flutter, but it reminded her they were still listening. Still with her. Not yet, she whispered to them. Not here. Please, not here. But she knew she didn't have a choice anymore. She stepped out onto the pavement, her shoes, soaked from the afternoon's walk for help, squished faintly with every step. She walked slowly toward the light, toward the glass entranceway, toward a place that told her, just by looking at it, that she did not belong. Her pace faltered. Another wave. She stopped, bent slightly forward, gripping the side of a trash bin for balance. Across the street, Ricardo adjusted his white gloves for the third time that hour. The lobby was quiet tonight. A few guests had checked in earlier. One suite was being prepared for. A late arrival, and the manager had gone upstairs to review reports. He was about to turn toward the valet stand when something caught the corner of his eye. A figure moving too slowly, head down, one hand pressed against her abdomen. At first he thought she might be injured, but as she stepped into the path of the entrance lights, he saw her clearly. She looked young. Not a child, but not old either. Her coat was torn along the seam of one arm, and her pants clung too tightly to her legs, not by choice, but because she had probably worn them too many days in a row. But it was her face that gave him pause, not because she looked afraid, but because she looked like someone who had no more strength left to pretend she wasn't. Ricardo had seen all kinds of people approach the glass doors of the Grandview Plaza. Businessmen, celebrities, politicians, and tired families dragging too many suitcases. He'd even seen protesters once, chanting from across the street until police moved them along. But in all his years at this door, he had never seen anyone approach like this. She wasn't walking toward the entrance as if she owned it. She wasn't even walking toward it as if she deserved it. She was walking because her body left her no other choice. He stepped forward instinctively, though his training told him to pause. Uniformed staff at a place like this were taught to manage appearances first, to prevent anything that might disturb the illusion of perfection. A woman in visible pain, her clothes clinging wetly to her, her expression tight with effort, that wasn't something the lobby usually welcomed. But Ricardo had lived too many years to confuse appearances with truth. He saw it in her eyes, determination, dignity, and something else, exhaustion so deep it seemed carved into her bones. She wasn't here for attention. She was here because she had nowhere else to go. Her hand slipped from the column and pressed against her belly again. She stopped moving. A small, strained sound escaped her lips. Ricardo's heart thudded. He abandoned his post. "Miss..." His voice was calm, though his pulse quickened. He reached her in a few strides, lowering himself slightly so his eyes met hers. "Are you all right?" She tried to straighten, as if standing taller might make her less of a problem. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Her accent was faint, her words careful, as if she had practiced apologies too many times. "I don't mean to disturb anything. I just..." Her breath caught, her hand gripped the wall. "My babies. They're coming." For a second, the sound of the city dulled. Ricardo heard nothing but her voice. Babies. Plural. "Coming. Madre de Dios," he muttered under his breath, then steadied himself. No, you're not disturbing anyone. Come inside." He extended his arm. "Lean on me. We'll get you somewhere safe." She hesitated. Her eyes flickered toward the glowing lobby beyond the glass. I don't belong there. Ricardo shook his head firmly. Belonging doesn't matter right now. What matters is you and those children. She looked at him, truly looked, and saw something steady in his expression. Something she hadn't seen in weeks, not pity, not suspicion, but genuine concern. Slowly, she took his arm. Each step was small, measured against the next contraction, threatening to bend her double. Ricardo adjusted his pace to match hers. At the door, the second doorman glanced up, startled, his mouth already forming the words of protocol. But one look at Ricardo's face silenced him. Together they guided her into the glow of the lobby. The shift was immediate. Outside, she had been another figure in the shadows. Inside, she was impossible to ignore. Guests glanced up from their seats near the fireplace, their conversations trailing into silence. A woman in pearls frowned, tugging her child closer as if discomfort might be contagious. A young man in a suit stared, then looked away quickly, embarrassed by his own curiosity. Valentina felt their eyes like needles. She tightened her grip on Ricardo's arm, fighting the urge to turn and leave. But leaving wasn't an option anymore. Her body was demanding attention, and no amount of dignity could hide that. Ricardo guided her toward one of the high-backed chairs near the check-in desk. Sit, he urged gently. Breathe. Help is coming. Her knees gave way before she could argue, and she collapsed into the seat, clutching her stomach as another contraction rolled through. Her breath hissed between clenched teeth. She focused on counting, on controlling the rhythm of her breathing, the way the nurse had taught her at the free clinic weeks ago. Ricardo waved sharply at the front desk. Call for medical. Now, his voice was no longer the soft tone of hospitality, but the clipped urgency of a man who had no time for hesitation. The receptionist stammered, already reaching for the phone. A hush spread across the lobby. The golden chandeliers glimmered overhead, casting light across marble that suddenly felt far too cold, too unyielding for what was about to happen. Valentina closed her eyes, whispering words meant only for herself. Hold on, little ones. Just a little longer. Valentina tried to breathe the way the nurse had instructed. Deep inhale. Slow exhale. But the pressure was too strong. Each contraction came closer than the last, like waves crashing against a wall already worn thin. Her fingers gripped the chair's armrest so tightly her knuckles turned pale. She could feel it. The beginning. Someone handed her a bottle of water. Another person draped a soft blanket around her shoulders. She didn't know who. Faces blurred in her peripheral vision. Too many unfamiliar voices all speaking at once. But she focused only on staying calm. Ricardo knelt beside her, one steadying hand on her knee. Stay with me, miss, you're safe now, all right? Help is on the way. She nodded, though she wasn't sure she believed him. Safety was a luxury she hadn't known in a long time. The staff around her didn't know what to do. They weren't trained for this. One concierge offered his jacket to place behind her back. Another tried dialing emergency again, asking how much longer the ambulance would take. Every second felt longer than the last. From the front desk, Miranda, efficient, poised, and sharp-eyed, stepped into view. She was mid-call, headset in one ear, scribbling notes as she spoke. Yes, female, approximately early 30s, in active labor. No known allergies, no prior notice, no identification yet. Yes, contractions are increasing in frequency. She signaled a housekeeper to bring fresh towels and a bottle of hand sanitizer. Do not argue, just do it. A valet rushed over with a small tray of food, unsure if it would help, but needing to do something. Ricardo waved it away gently. She can't eat right now. Valentina's breath caught again. She leaned forward, bracing against another wave. The pain was raw now, centered and low. Her voice cracked. Too soon. I don't think I can wait. Ricardo glanced toward the elevator, then at the lobby entrance. No paramedics yet. His voice lowered, quieter this time. You're doing incredible. Do you hear me? Just hold on. A little more. She looked at him through tear-filled eyes. You don't have to do this. Yes, I do. That was all he said. Guests watched from behind the safety of distance, some with sympathy, others with suspicion. But none stepped forward. No one asked her name. No one offered her anything more than a passing glance or a lowered voice. Except him. In the background, one of the bellhops whispered to a guest, "They'll probably escort her out after the medics come." Ricardo turned his head, just slightly. He'd heard the comment. His jaw tightened. He didn't respond. Valentina shifted again. Her voice trembled now. "They're coming. I can feel them moving." He nodded. "Stay with me. You're not alone." The weight of those words lingered longer than any comfort she'd felt in weeks. Just then, the elevator chimed. The doors slid open. Someone stepped out, tall and composed, a tailored suit brushing the edge of polished shoes. Not a guest, not another employee. It was the owner. The elevator opened without a sound, as if reluctant to interrupt what was unfolding below. From the high-gloss floor emerged a man in charcoal gray, his steps silent, measured. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. Staff who caught a glimpse of him straightened instinctively, the way shoulders lifted, the way a murmur passed between those near the reception desk. It could only mean one thing. The boss had arrived. He didn't glance at the guests. He didn't greet the lobby team. His eyes found her immediately, a woman in a threadbare coat, soaked socks peeking from cracked shoes, face pale, hair damp, body curling inward from another wave of pain. She looked misplaced, and yet she didn't. There was something unmistakable about the way she sat, fragile, yes, but not broken. Her hands trembled, but her voice, when she spoke softly to the unborn children inside her, was steady, protective, fierce. He found himself standing still. She didn't look up until her body allowed her to. When she did, their eyes met. Something passed between them, quiet, unseen, but unmissable. She looked at him without flinching, not with shame, not with expectation. She looked at him like a woman who had already lost everything worth, fearing and still chose to stand her ground, even while sitting, the rest of the world blurred. He stepped forward. "The paramedics are on their way," he said, voice quieter than usual. He expected it to come out with the cold efficiency of a man trained to manage situations, but it didn't. It came out. Human. She nodded, barely. "Thank you. I didn't mean to disrupt anything, I just had nowhere else." "You didn't disrupt anything," he replied. "You're exactly where you need to be." Miranda raised an eyebrow behind the front desk. This was not how he usually handled surprises. But she said nothing. A housekeeper returned with towels and bottles of water. Someone brought more blankets. The guests had stopped pretending not to watch. But they weren't the focus anymore. Valentina leaned back in the chair, breathing deeply through another wave of pain. Her eyes fluttered shut for just a second. He crouched beside her, carefully. "Is there anyone I can call?" "No one left," she whispered. "I'll stay until help arrives," he said. "Unless you'd rather I didn't." Her eyes opened again, soft and tired. "Thank you. No title. No, sir. No pretense. Just gratitude stripped bare." He nodded once, then turned to Ricardo and said something no one expected. "Prepare the top suite." The doorman blinked. "Sir, she's not giving birth in the lobby." Someone inhaled audibly. A manager, halfway down the corridor, turned to listen. The owner turned back to her. "If you'll allow us, we'll move you somewhere more comfortable." She hesitated, unsure. "I'll go with you," he added. "If that helps." She didn't say yes, but she didn't say no. Comment below, what would you have done if you were the doorman that night? Would you follow protocol, or would you have helped her too? I'd love to hear your heart. Upstairs, the world was quiet. Muted lighting glowed over polished hardwood, and the faint hum of climate control filled the space with even engineered calm. He preferred it that way, controlled, reliable, efficient. He stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling window, a crystal tumbler in hand, the amber liquid inside untouched. Nathaniel Sterling didn't drink often, not because of some moral compass, simply because distraction, any distraction, was a threat to his rhythm. He had built a system around not feeling much. He found it useful. 34 years old, CEO of a multi-billion-dollar hospitality empire, named in countless publications as one of the country's most influential figures in real estate and luxury branding. To everyone else, he had everything. And yet, here he stood, staring at a skyline that didn't excite him anymore. He'd bought the view. Literally. Every building within sight either belonged to his portfolio or bowed to its shadow. There were no more peaks to climb, just numbers to maintain. He turned from the window. The penthouse suite, converted into his temporary office for the night, sat in perfect order. Reports spread out over the long mahogany table, A staff performance audit open on one screen, profit and loss graphs glowing cold blue on the other. He had planned to spend the night reviewing operations, quietly, efficiently, unnoticed. But he wasn't reading anymore. His eyes had drifted across the security feed monitor, installed for convenience, not curiosity. He didn't usually check it himself, but something in the background noise had made him glance up. That's when he saw her. A woman, young, visibly pregnant, being helped into the lobby. At first, he assumed she was a guest experiencing a medical emergency. But her clothes didn't match the setting. Neither did the way she clutched her abdomen or moved like she was resisting collapse. He paused the feed. The resolution wasn't high, but her expression struck him. There was a strength in her features, a refusal to beg. Even in visible discomfort, she seemed composed in a way he didn't understand. He watched as Ricardo helped her toward one of the chairs. Nathaniel leaned back, jaw tightening. He wasn't supposed to be invested. Not emotionally, not at all. This was the Grandview Plaza, his flagship property. His standards, his rules. Everything was meant to be predictable here, but nothing about her was. He should have called someone. That's what protocol dictated. A manager, security, medical services. Let the staff handle it. But he didn't. He stared at the still frame on the monitor, her bent slightly forward. One hand braced against the armrest, the other protecting her belly. There was no sound, only the frozen image of something far too human for the sterility of his office. He found himself reaching for his jacket. His assistant, Miranda, appeared in the doorway, always sharp, always 2 steps ahead. She stopped mid-sentence when she saw him moving toward the elevator. "There's a situation in the lobby," she said carefully, holding a clipboard. "A woman in distress. I was about to alert." "I've seen it," he replied. "Call the paramedics. I'm going down." Miranda blinked. "You're going personally?" He didn't answer, just pressed the elevator button and waited. Inside the lift, silence pressed against him like pressure from all sides. He stared at his reflection in the mirrored walls. The tie was too tight, the face too unreadable. He looked like someone who had everything together. He looked like someone he no longer respected. The truth was, he didn't remember the last time he felt moved by anything. Not joy, not sadness, not even anger. He'd mastered indifference. It kept him productive, made decisions easier, protected him from the ache that came after his divorce when he realized love could be conditional after all. He'd spent 2 years building walls, not emotional ones, real ones, towers, hotels, spaces that insulated him from unpredictability. And yet, here he was, going down to face the very thing he'd worked so hard to avoid. As the elevator descended, he thought about his father, the man who built the first hotel in there, chain with more grit than capital, who believed hospitality was about people, not spreadsheets. Nathaniel had always thought he was wrong. People were liabilities, systems worked, people broke, but something about the woman downstairs didn't look broken, not even close. The elevator doors opened. The sound was barely noticeable, but the energy in the lobby shifted. Those who worked there knew who had arrived, even without turning. There was a weight to his presence, an invisible authority that altered conversations mid-sentence. Nathaniel stepped out and surveyed the room. The first thing he saw was the crowd gathered near the lounge chairs. The second was her. She sat low in the chair, one hand braced on her belly, her breathing uneven but focused. A housekeeper hovered near her with a stack of fresh towels. Ricardo stood protectively at her side. A manager murmured instructions too quietly to matter. But Nathaniel only saw her. Her face was pale. Her clothes clung to her. Her hair was damp and tangled, but she didn't shrink from the stares. She didn't look helpless. She looked fierce, not in volume, in presence, in the way her eyes stayed open through the pain, in how she kept whispering calm things, maybe to herself, maybe to the babies. He didn't move at first. It was one thing to watch her on a screen. It was another to stand across from her, flesh and breath and pain and courage all pressed into one moment. He felt rooted, not by duty, by something else, something older, something personal. He finally walked forward. Each step felt deliberate, heavier than the ones before. He stopped just a few feet away, lowering his voice. "The paramedics are on their way." She turned to him slowly. Their eyes met. Her expression didn't change, but something passed between them, Not warmth, not fear, something deeper than either. Recognition, not of faces, but of burdens. He realized she wasn't waiting for permission to be strong. She had already chosen to be. "Thank you," she said, voice faint but steady. "I didn't mean to disrupt anything. I just needed somewhere." Nathaniel swallowed. The air felt tight. "You're not disrupting anything." The words surprised even him, but the truth of them settled into his bones. "You're exactly where you need to be." The moment lingered, not because of anything dramatic. No gasps, no sudden movements, just stillness. Her breathing slowed for a brief second. His world, which had always ticked in numbers and deadlines, felt quiet in a new way. Not empty, but full. He didn't know her name, didn't know her story, but he knew one thing with clarity that startled him. He wanted her to stay. He turned slightly, addressing Ricardo without taking his eyes off her. "How long ago did she arrive?" Ricardo, still crouched beside her, answered calmly. "Less than 15 minutes, sir. She was outside, alone. I brought her in when she started to fall forward." Nathaniel gave a slight nod. He looked down at the chair, high-backed, elegant, upholstered in fabric that probably cost more than her car. It wasn't enough. "She shouldn't be here," he said, then paused. "In the lobby, I mean." Valentina's eyes flicked to his face, guarded now. "I don't mean you're unwelcome," he added quickly. "You're not. This isn't comfortable enough." He turned to Miranda, who had reappeared with a clipboard. "What suite's unoccupied tonight?" "The executive floor is blocked for maintenance. The only open suite is the presidential." "Good," he interrupted. "Prepare it." Miranda blinked. "Sir?" "She's going there." A hush passed through the staff. The presidential suite was sacred territory, usually reserved for diplomats, foreign investors, or heads of industry. Not for women with no reservation, no name on file, no credit card. But Nathaniel didn't care. "I'll take her myself," he said. Valentina looked up sharply. "Why would you do that?" The question wasn't rude. It was honest, curious. It came from someone who'd learned that nothing comes free. He didn't answer right away. He knelt beside her, offering his hand. Not to help her stand, but simply to let her choose. "I don't know," he said quietly. "But if you'll trust me, just for now, I'll make sure you have what you need." She stared at him, then placed her hand in his. If you've ever believed in fate, or even questioned it, leave a comment below. "I want to know where you stand." The elevator doors closed behind them with a soft hush, but the energy inside was far from calm. Nathaniel stood beside her, arm bracing her gently, careful not to crowd. Valentina's breathing was shallow, uneven. Every minute or two, her body clenched with a sharpness that made her lips pull tight and her eyes press closed. "Try to stay with me," he said, his voice quiet. She gave a faint nod. Ricardo stood at the elevator panel, watching the numbers climb with practiced ease, but even he couldn't hide the flicker of anxiety in his jaw. When the doors opened onto the executive floor, 2 housekeepers were already waiting. Miranda had acted quickly. They stepped aside, eyes wide, as Valentina was guided toward the open double doors of the presidential suite. Inside, the lighting had been dimmed. Warm lamps flickered on the walls, and the largest bedroom had been cleared of decorative clutter. Fresh linens had been placed on the bed, along with stacks of folded towels, unopened water bottles, and an extra robe. Valentina winced as she lowered herself onto the edge of the bed. Her entire body was tense. Nathaniel crouched beside her, removing his jacket and setting it aside. "Breathe," he said softly. "You're not alone anymore." A knock at the door broke the moment. A female voice called out, calm but firm, "Emergency medical." Ricardo opened the door, revealing a pair of paramedics. One of them, a middle-aged woman with calm eyes and gray streaks in her dark hair, moved in first. "I'm Carmen," she said gently, already putting on gloves. "Let's see how far along you are." Nathaniel stepped back, letting the professionals in. But he didn't leave. He stood in the corner, silent, watching as Valentina clutched the edge of the sheets, her face strained, her body clearly in distress. Carmen spoke to her in a low voice, asking questions, checking vitals, making quick calculations. "She's dilated," she told her partner. "More than expected. These babies aren't waiting." Valentina groaned, leaning forward. "I knew it," she whispered. "It's too soon." Carmen placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're doing everything right, and they're coming whether we're ready or not." Nathaniel stepped closer again. What do you need? Carmen glanced at him quickly. Fresh towels, hot water if possible, a calm space. She'll need support on both sides, someone steady. She may deliver right here. He nodded once and turned to Ricardo. Bring what they ask for. Ricardo was already moving. Valentina's breath caught again. I don't know if I can. Nathaniel leaned close. You already are. His voice didn't carry the tone of motivation. It wasn't performative. It was simple, honest, and something in it steadied her. Carmen looked up briefly, eyebrows raised. She didn't say it out loud, but the message was clear. She trusts you. Stay right there. Valentina's breathing grew louder, raw, uneven, edged with panic. The pain was no longer something she could manage through quiet determination. It had overtaken her, and each contraction pulled her further away from composure. They're coming, she gasped. I can feel it. Carmen remained steady. She had done this before, at roadside stops, in kitchens, in back seats of cars. A hotel suite was almost a luxury, but even she felt the weight of this moment. Something about the woman in front of her, the way she fought to stay upright through the pain, the way she never once asked, why me? She was holding herself together with a kind of bravery Carmen had only seen in people with nothing left to lose. Your body knows what to do, Carmen said, glancing to her partner who was already laying out supplies. You've just got to listen to it now. Valentina cried out again, short, sharp, the sound of someone surrendering to the inevitable. Nathaniel moved to her side before thinking. He reached for her hand, unsure if it would be welcome. She grabbed it instantly. Her grip was strong, desperate, but not afraid. There was no hesitation, no explanation needed. She held on like someone who'd been carrying herself for too long and had finally found a moment to lean. Nathaniel didn't let go. Carmen gave him a quick look. If you're going to stay there, talk to her, keep her focused. She's slipping into panic. He nodded, tightening his hold just slightly. Valentina. He used her name for the first time. You're doing something extraordinary. I don't know much about strength, but I know it when I see it. You're stronger than anyone in this room. She blinked through the haze of pain, eyes wet, lips trembling. She didn't speak, but her breathing calmed. You've come this far, he whispered, and I'm not leaving. Whatever happens next, I'm here. Outside the room, the world spun on. Guests checked into their rooms. Elevators dinged. Cars pulled into the valet. The city kept moving. But inside that suite, time narrowed to the space between contractions. The room smelled faintly of lavender from the diffuser someone had plugged in earlier. Carmen kept her voice low, her instructions clear. She's crowning. First baby's nearly here. Push with me, Valentina. Now. Valentina screamed. A sound that didn't ask for sympathy. It demanded space. It carved open the room. Nathaniel's heart pounded. He had faced lawsuits, boardroom ambushes, million-dollar losses. None of it compared to the helplessness he felt watching her in this moment. And yet, he didn't feel useless. He felt present. Every sound mattered. Every breath. Every squeeze of her hand. And then, something shifted. Carmen straightened. Heads out. One more push. Deep breath. Valentina bore down with a sound that tore itself out of her. Her face red, her voice cracking. And then, silence, followed by a cry. High, piercing, small. The sound of life beginning. Carmen moved quickly, cradling the tiny newborn in her arms with practiced hands. The child's cries cut through the thick air of the suite, like a melody no one had expected but instantly needed. A girl, she announced, breath steady. She's perfect. Valentina's head fell back on the pillow, chest heaving. Her eyes were wide, unfocused, rimmed with exhaustion and relief. She's okay, she whispered. Nathaniel stared down at the little bundle wrapped in towels, red-faced, wet and wailing, but somehow radiant, not in appearance, in presence. She's beautiful, he murmured, almost to himself. Carmen gently passed the child to the assistant, who began cleaning her with tender efficiency. Then she turned back to Valentina. You're not done yet, she said. The second baby's on the way. Valentina closed her eyes, already bracing for another wave. I don't have anything left, she said weakly. Nathaniel squeezed her hand. Yes, you do. Her fingers barely curled around his now, but he didn't let go. You've come this far. One more time. You already know how. Carmen wiped her forehead with a damp towel. We're close. I need you back in this moment, Valentina. Focus on the sound of your son." Valentina blinked. "Son? You've got a daughter," Carmen said softly. "And a son on the way. That's what we're bringing into the world next." A breath caught in Valentina's throat. Her hand trembled in Nathaniel's. Her eyes opened, locked on his. "They're going to need names," he said gently. She let out a breath. "Luna," she whispered. "For her. She came first." The name settled into the space between them, like it had always belonged. Carmen was already repositioning, her tone shifting back to focused command. "We've got movement." "He's ready." The room grew still again. Even Luna's cries had faded into soft coos, held in safe arms just feet away. Outside the tall windows, the city lights flickered. A faint glow shifted across the glass. No storm, just the subtle change in the air before dawn. A quiet turning point. Valentina clenched her jaw, gave one more push, and then came the second cry. This one louder, deeper. Carmen caught the boy in steady hands. "Here he is," she smiled. Strong lungs, 10 fingers, 10 toes. She laid him on a towel and wiped him clean, her expression warmer than it had been all night. Nathaniel stepped forward, unable to stop himself. The boy opened his eyes for just a second, brief, unfocused, but Nathaniel froze. There was something about his face, the shape, the brow, the strength of his jaw, even at minutes old. He looked familiar. Nathaniel didn't speak. Not at first. He couldn't. The boy, red-faced and wriggling, blinking into a world he didn't yet understand, bore a familiarity Nathaniel couldn't dismiss. It wasn't in the obvious details. It was in the structure of his features, the angle of his cheekbones, the tiny crease between his brows as he cried. It reminded Nathaniel of someone he hadn't seen in years, not in person, but in photographs. Family photos, ones his father used to keep tucked in old files, occasionally brought out in long, quiet evenings when business wasn't enough to distract from the past. Carmen placed the boy into Valentina's arms. Her hands, though shaking, held him like she'd done it 100 times before. There was no fear now, only awe. "This is Saul," she whispered. "His name means son." Nathaniel felt something catch in his throat. "Luna and Saul," he repeated softly. "Night and day," Valentina said. "They won't be the same, but they'll balance each other." "I know it." Nathaniel glanced at Luna, now resting quietly in the arms of the second paramedic, wrapped in white cloth. Her tiny hands curled toward her face. Her lashes, impossibly long, rested against skin still warm from effort and grace. He looked at Saul again. The resemblance struck him harder this time. He knew that brow, that shape of the mouth. It didn't belong to him, but to someone connected to him. Someone from before. His father. The room was quiet now. Carmen and her team moved gently around the suite, gathering used towels, disinfecting surfaces, quietly discussing vitals. But Nathaniel stood still. "Valentina," he said quietly. She looked up. "What was your maiden name?" She blinked, caught off guard. "Rousseau." "Why?" Nathaniel took a slow step back. The room tilted, not physically, but internally. He was losing balance in a way he hadn't in years. "My father," he said, voice tight. "Marcus Sterling. Did he ever mention him?" She nodded slowly. "When I was a little girl, yes, they were business partners. Something happened. I never knew the full story, just that it ended badly." Nathaniel pressed his fingers to his forehead. It wasn't just a coincidence. Not anymore. These children weren't strangers to him. Not spiritually. Not historically. They were part of a connection his father had spent his final years quietly, regretting, a broken partnership, a missed opportunity for resolution. Now, in the arms of this woman, the daughter of the man his father couldn't save, Nathaniel stood face to face with a chance at redemption neither of them had asked for, but one they were both standing inside of. Valentina was watching him now. Cautiously. Her strength had returned, not in the absence of pain, but because of what she had just survived. "What is it?" she asked. He didn't answer. Not yet. He looked again at Luna, then at Saul, and in the soft light of the suite, with the world beyond their window just beginning to shift from night to morning, he realized this wasn't just a birth. It was a return. Nathaniel stood near the window, his posture still but rigid. The city beyond the glass was beginning to glow with early morning light. The sky held that silver-blue hue that arrives before the sun officially takes its place, a soft warning that the world was about to start over. Behind him, Valentina rocked gently with Saul in her arms. She had tucked him into a soft blanket and was humming, not a melody exactly, just a rhythm that came from instinct. Luna lay nearby, asleep now, her breathing steady and delicate. The suite was silent, except for the soft sounds of new life. But inside Nathaniel, everything was loud. His thoughts spun, names, dates, images he hadn't conjured in years. A man's face, photographs of factory floors and paper contracts, arguments in his father's study, voices never raised, just weighed down with guilt. And the name, Rousseau. The name had drifted through his childhood like a cautionary tale. Not a villain, not a failure, just a shadow. Henri Rousseau had been his father's early business partner, talented, ambitious, proud. Nathaniel remembered hearing how the two of them had once stood at the edge of something great, a vision for a hospitality company rooted in values, dignity, fairness, opportunity. But somewhere along the way, the market collapsed. Loans fell through. One had more capital, the other more risk. Henri had taken the brunt. His business collapsed, his reputation frayed, and even though Nathaniel's father had offered help, money, a second chance, Henri refused. He'd died shortly after. Nathaniel had only heard whispers of what really happened. His father never spoke of it often, but on certain nights, after long meetings or too many hours reviewing numbers, Marcus would pull out a bottle of scotch, sit in the study, and hold an old letter in his hand. He never let Nathaniel read it, but once, just once, Nathaniel had caught a glimpse of the name at the top. Henri Rousseau. Now, standing in the presence of the man's daughter, Nathaniel felt every unsaid thing echo inside him. He turned from the window. Valentina looked up from the chair where she sat cradling her son. The early light brushed against her face, softening the lines of fatigue and leaving only strength behind. "You said your name is Valentina Rousseau," he said, voice low. She nodded, watching him closely. "Yes, Henri. Was your father?" Her expression shifted slightly, not in fear, but in recognition of something deeper. "You knew him?" Nathaniel moved slowly across the room, lowering himself into the chair across from her. "Not personally. But my father did. His name was Marcus Sterling." Valentina blinked, startled, but quiet. "I remember that name. He spoke of your father often, not in anger, not even in guilt, just with weight, like something he never figured out how to carry." A silence settled between them. Not awkward, not cold, just heavy. Valentina broke it. "My father died when I was a teenager. He never blamed anyone. He always said business has costs, and sometimes the ones who keep their integrity pay the highest price." Nathaniel nodded. "My father thought he failed him, that he didn't do enough. I remember asking why it haunted him so much, and he said, because Henri was one of the few people who actually believed in building something that mattered." Valentina looked down at Saul, her hand stroking the soft fabric wrapped around him. He did. He believed in dignity, even when it cost him everything. Nathaniel's voice tightened. "I think that's why this moment, this connection, feels like more than just chance." She looked back at him, eyes searching. "It's strange, isn't it, the way paths cross years later, and how the choices of one generation end up finding the next?" He nodded, but didn't speak. There was too much in his chest. Saul had fallen asleep in Valentina's arms. His tiny chest rose and fell in slow, shallow rhythms as she watched him in silence. She didn't speak for a while. Neither did Nathaniel. The moment demanded stillness, not because there was nothing to say, but because the truth needed space to breathe. When she finally looked up, her voice was quiet. "My father used to sit at the table late at night with his hands folded like this." She mimicked the position with one hand on top of the other. "Sometimes he didn't speak for hours, just stared. As a child, I thought he was angry, but later, I realized he was carrying something he didn't want us to feel." Nathaniel nodded slowly. "My father did the same. He kept it all inside, showed the world the image of certainty, but it wore him down, especially toward the end." Valentina leaned back, her expression thoughtful. It's strange to think about how much they had in common, two men with pride, with vision, who believed in building something lasting, but couldn't, Nathaniel added, or weren't allowed to. That made Nathaniel pause. He realized he'd spent years believing that failure belonged to those who couldn't make the numbers work. But sitting across from Valentina, her face lit with the calm of someone who had lived through real struggle, he began to question that. Maybe failure wasn't falling short of success. Maybe it was losing sight of what success was ever meant to be. "My father tried to offer your father help after it all collapsed," Nathaniel said. He never talked much about how it ended. But I remember once, during a holiday dinner, he said, "There are men who walk away from the wounded, and there are men who stay even when there's nothing left to save." Valentina smiled faintly. "That sounds like my father, too. He said your dad came to our house once, sat on our porch and offered to pay off some of the debts. My father refused, not because he didn't need it, but because he didn't want to accept charity from someone who had done everything he could." Nathaniel looked down, folding his hands in his lap. "I wish I had known that." She tilted her head. "Why?" "Because I grew up thinking my father had made a decision that ruined someone else's life. I carried that, even when I didn't want to. And now—" He paused. She waited. "Now I'm holding the child of the man my father grieved for. And I don't know what to do with that." Valentina took a slow breath. "You don't have to do anything with it. Just honor it. That's enough." Nathaniel met her gaze. There was no bitterness in her, no blame, just a quiet strength that made her words feel more like truth than comfort. He let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding. "I thought I came downstairs tonight because it was the right thing to do. But the truth is I couldn't stay away. I saw you, and something pulled me toward you. Not because of guilt, not because of duty. Something older, something I didn't have words for." Valentina cradled Saul a little closer. "Sometimes life finds ways to finish conversations our parents never got to have." Nathaniel didn't speak. He couldn't, because somehow, in that sentence, she'd said everything he hadn't been able to articulate since he walked into the lobby. The hotel room had grown quiet, not awkward or strained, but full, as if the silence was no longer something to fill, but something to feel. Nathaniel stood and moved to the window, where the city pulsed in amber halos beneath the night. He stared out at the blurred skyline, not really seeing it. "I've spent my whole life chasing what I thought mattered," he said. "Company expansions, shareholder meetings, metrics and milestones. It was all supposed to mean something, and does it?" Valentina asked gently. He turned to face her. "Tonight, none of it feels real. But this," his voice caught as he looked at the sleeping twins. "This does." Valentina didn't respond with words. She simply adjusted the small cap on Luna's head, the motion so instinctive, so soft it stilled something in him. "After my divorce," he said, almost to himself, "I convinced myself I didn't need people. Just purpose, just performance." She looked up. "But people are purpose, even when they break your heart." Nathaniel nodded slowly. "That's what I'm beginning to understand." He walked over and knelt beside her chair, not out of impulse, but because he didn't want to tower over her in that moment. He wanted to be eye level, equal, present. "You're stronger than anyone I've met," he said. Valentina shook her head. "I'm just tired of breaking apart and pretending it doesn't hurt." "That's strength," he said softly, "not hiding the cracks." She looked at him carefully now, not as a guest or a rescuer or even the CEO, but as a man she was starting to understand. Someone trying. Someone finally honest with himself. A small voice stirred from the bassinet, Luna's, the quiet cooing of a newborn, fragile and full of life. They both turned, and for a long moment, they simply watched her. "She's going to be someone who changes people," Nathaniel said. "I can feel it." "She already has," Valentina replied. They shared a glance, not romantic, not sentimental, but deeply human. Something in the air shifted, again, because in that moment, they weren't strangers tied together by coincidence. They were the children of two men who once tried and failed to build something together. But maybe, just maybe, their children would succeed where their fathers couldn't. The next morning arrived without fanfare, just the soft rustle of hotel linens and the faint hum of a city returning to motion. Nathaniel had barely slept. He'd sat up most of the night in a corner armchair, watching the twins breathe. The rise and fall of their tiny chests had become a rhythm he couldn't look away from. It was like watching proof that something sacred still existed in the world. Valentina had finally fallen into a deep, much-needed sleep on the bed beside them. Her face, even in rest, bore the outlines of weariness, but also a serenity that only arrived after surviving something that nearly swallowed you whole. Nathaniel stood and moved to the bassinet where Saul now stirred. The boy opened his eyes slowly. Not just any brown or hazel. No, they were familiar. Exactly like the eyes in a framed photo that had sat on Marcus Sterling's desk for years. The same ones that belonged to Henri Rousseau's portrait, the one Nathaniel had passed 100 times in the family library without truly noticing. He knelt beside the boy. "You don't even know the weight you carry," he whispered, "or the healing you've already started." He turned to Luna, still curled beside her brother, her expression peaceful, as if she already knew something about the world the rest of them were just learning. In that moment, Nathaniel didn't feel like an executive, or a strategist, or a man with something to prove. He felt like a son of a father who tried his best, a man standing in the shadow of legacy, finally understanding what it means to cast light instead. Behind him, Valentina stirred. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes, and glanced toward the bassinets. Then her eyes found Nathaniel's, and held. "How long was I out?" she asked, her voice hoarse. "A few hours." She sat in silence for a while. "Then you stayed." "I didn't want to be anywhere else." A pause. He stood and walked to her side. "Valentina, I need to say something, and I don't expect anything from you in return." Her expression shifted slightly, alert but open. "My father, he carried guilt about what happened with yours. Not because he was to blame, but because it hurt him to lose someone he respected. I think he would have wanted me to know this truth, to see that the story didn't end with business failures and regret." Her eyes filled with something unspoken, understanding, grace, sadness too, but softened by something stronger. "And I think," Nathaniel continued, voice steady, "he would have loved to meet you, and these two—" Valentina didn't respond right away, but when she did, her words were quiet and sure. "Maybe our father's story wasn't about failure. Maybe it was the prologue." Nathaniel nodded. "To something better." She reached down and touched her children's blankets. "These two," she said softly, "they won't grow up hearing stories about loss. They'll hear about legacy and dignity, and how a single act of kindness changed everything." A long silence passed, one of those moments that doesn't demand to be filled. Finally, Nathaniel said, "I'd like to be part of their story. However you'll let me." Valentina turned to him, her gaze clear, unafraid. "We'll write the next chapters together," she said. Not a promise, not a pledge, but the first brick in something that could hold real weight. Something built not from apology, but from intention. Have you ever discovered a shocking connection with someone by chance? Share your story in the comments. We read every one, and sometimes, just like Valentina and Nathaniel, we realize that coincidence might not be coincidence at all. For the first time in weeks, Valentina awoke without fear. No knock on the window of a parking lot. No clanging of city sounds invading her restless sleep. Just softness, warmth, safety. The suite was still, the kind of stillness that only follows great movement. Luna was asleep on her chest. Saul, swaddled beside them in the bassinet, snored softly in the tiny hiccuped way newborns do. And across the room, seated with his laptop open but clearly not working, was him, Nathaniel. Not the corporate architect in a tailored suit. Not the media-dubbed boy genius behind Sterling Industries. Just a man, watching, quietly, seeing her. Their eyes met. Neither spoke. There were no grand gestures, no declarations, just the hush of understanding between two people who had both lost more than they'd ever admitted. Until now. In the days that followed, Nathaniel didn't try to impress her. He showed up. Every morning he checked the bottles, prepped the formula just in case Valentina needed a break, and made sure there were clean towels and breakfast waiting. He listened as she fumbled through feeding schedules, adjusting to the twin cries that alternated unpredictably like a duet she was still learning to conduct. He didn't offer pity. He offered presence. Once, when Saul wouldn't stop crying, Valentina's composure cracked. She didn't scream. She didn't break. She just sat on the edge of the bed, blinking rapidly, her hands trembling. Nathaniel crossed the room, knelt beside her, and placed Saul gently in her arms. "You don't have to be perfect," he said. "Not here. Not with me." She nodded. And that was the moment it began. Not love in the traditional romantic sense, but a deep partnership. A recognition of effort. a quiet choosing. Between diaper changes and soft lullabies, they spoke about their lives in fragments. Valentina told him about flour-covered mornings in her mother's kitchen, about how dough became her language of love, about the dream of owning a small bakery filled with laughter and warm cinnamon air. Her voice always softened when she spoke of it, as if saying it aloud kept it alive. Nathaniel confessed that he hadn't eaten a home-cooked meal in over 5 years. He didn't say it with pride. It came out like an apology. "My mother used to make garlic bread so strong it made your eyes water," he said, chuckling. "Haven't tasted anything close since she passed." Valentina looked up. "I can make that." "You haven't slept," he said. "I haven't baked in weeks." He smiled then. A real smile. The kind that shifts something unspoken. Have you ever learned the true heart of someone? Not through romance, but through how they show up when no one is watching? Let me know in the comments. Nathaniel didn't announce it. No fanfare. No receipts waved or names dropped. He just knocked softly on the door of the suite, stepped inside with sleeves rolled and hair slightly tousled, and said, "There's something downstairs for you." Valentina followed him cautiously, still in her socks, still cradling Luna to her chest. The elevator opened directly onto a private delivery. 2 custom-made cribs, one oak, one maple, both etched with soft curved engravings. A local artisan had crafted them in just under 24 hours. Ricardo had driven to pick them up himself. "Why 2?" she asked, stunned. Nathaniel looked mildly confused. "They're twins." Valentina blinked. "I mean, why not a shared bassinet? This must have cost." "They deserve something of their own. Their first space," he replied simply. "They didn't ask to come into this world the way they did, but we get to decide how they're welcomed." For a long moment, she didn't speak. Then, finally, "Thank you. Not for the cribs. For the thought." One evening, Valentina brought out an old photo from her handbag. It was creased and slightly faded, but the faces were unmistakable. Her father, Henri Rousseau, smiling in front of a weather-worn bakery in his chef's whites, holding a small child in his arms. "This was the day he opened his dream," she said. He believed feeding people was the highest form of love. Nathaniel studied the image for a long time. "He looks like the kind of man who'd remember your birthday, even if he had nothing to give." "He was," she nodded. "Every year, he baked me a cake, even when we couldn't afford meat." Nathaniel looked out the window for a while, then said something he never thought he would. "My father used to drive us around to neighborhoods he never planned to buy into, just to show us the people building lives without boardrooms. He used to say, 'Success isn't what you own, it's how you're remembered.'" Valentina stared at him. "He said that?" "More than once." They sat in silence for a while, letting that line live in the air between them. Valentina wasn't naive. She knew people like Nathaniel didn't usually linger once a situation had stabilized. Wealth often shows up when there's a headline, disappears when there's laundry to fold. But Nathaniel stayed, not because he felt guilty, not to be seen, because each day he seemed to discover something new in the slowness of shared moments, feeding Saul with a warm bottle, reading paperwork with Luna curled into his lap, laughing unexpectedly when Valentina teased him about his inability to fold onesies correctly. He was changing, not rapidly, not dramatically, but steadily, and so was she. Valentina no longer walked with her head down. She began to ask the hotel staff for things without apology. She took longer showers, drank her coffee hot, joked with Ricardo like they were old friends. She was healing. And so was he. It was nearly 2 a.m. The suite was quiet except for the soft hum of the city below and the occasional sigh from Luna or Saul. Valentina was curled in the corner of the sectional, her robe loosely tied, hair in a messy bun, holding a warm bottle, while Nathaniel sat across from her cross-legged, holding Saul with both hands like the boy was something rare. "I don't think I've ever stayed still this long," he admitted. Valentina gave a gentle smile. "Maybe that's not such a bad thing." Nathaniel glanced at her, a question quietly forming. "Are you afraid?" "Of what?" "This. Us." Valentina looked down at Luna, now drowsy, cheek pressed against her chest. "Yes," she said plainly. "But I think I'm more afraid of losing what's never been real. This feels real." He exhaled, deeply. "Me too." One afternoon, while sorting through a pile of old books a staff member had brought up for her, Valentina stumbled on something unexpected wedged inside a hardcover, an old, unmailed postcard. The image on the front was of a beach in Marseille. The handwriting on the back was her father's. To Val, one day we'll sit on this shore with a baguette between us and nothing to worry about but the tide. Love, Papa. Nathaniel walked in just as she finished reading. She handed it to him. Didn't speak. He read it, quietly, then folded it and placed it back inside the book with care. I want that for you, he said. For us, she corrected, surprising them both. Valentina didn't need Nathaniel to rescue her. What she did need, what she never dared say aloud, was someone who didn't flinch at the mess of real life, someone who didn't disappear when things got hard. Nathaniel had spent years thinking strength came from control, from solitude, from staying ahead of the market and avoiding emotional risk. But now, as he watched her rock Saul to sleep with half-lidded eyes and sore feet, he understood something his board meetings never taught him. Strength was in the quiet, in the staying, in the holding on when life asks you to let go. 3 days later, Nathaniel found a folded sheet of paper sitting beside his coffee. She hadn't meant for him to see it. It was addressed simply to the version of me I no longer need to be. Inside were raw lines written in ink that had smudged from her fingers. I used to think survival was the same as living, that being strong meant pretending I was fine. But it turns out strength is letting someone see you cry at 3 a.m. It's handing your child to a man you once feared might walk away. It's falling asleep knowing the world is unfair, but feeling loved anyway. I don't need to run anymore. I think I'm ready to stay. Val. Nathaniel sat for a long time with the letter in his hands, and then he folded it, placed it in his wallet, and carried it with him. Valentina was rolling dough in the hotel's commercial kitchen. The staff had offered her the space to create again. She wore an apron Nathaniel had custom made that said Luna and Saul Rising. She'd named her future bakery after her children, but also after the strength she'd found in darkness and the light that had followed. Nathaniel stood in the doorway, quietly watching. She hadn't noticed him yet. The flower on her cheek, the way she hummed under her breath, the confidence in her movements. This wasn't about pity. This wasn't about fixing something broken. This was witnessing someone already whole. And he loved her. That evening, as Valentina fed the twins, Nathaniel knelt beside her, not with a proposal, not with a ring, but with a question. Will you let me build something with you? Not just a business or a house, but a life? She looked up, startled, bottle in hand. I'm not ready to answer that yet, she whispered honestly, but I'm ready to keep asking the question with you. Every day after, they chose to talk, chose to stay, chose to show up even when sleep was short and moods were sharp. Nathaniel learned how to swaddle. Valentina learned to delegate. They both learned that love wasn't built in declarations. It was built in dishes washed and tears caught at 2:15 a.m. He stopped leaving for board meetings unless she said, go. She started taking breaks when he said, rest. They weren't perfect, but they were committed. One morning, Valentina opened a letter that had been mailed years ago but never reached her. It was from Marcus Sterling, Nathaniel's father, to Henri's daughter. I've never forgotten your father's grace. I hope one day our families find peace. I believe in second chances. I hope you do too. M. Sterling. She sat down and cried, not from grief, but from release. Have you ever discovered a connection with someone that changed everything you thought you knew? Tell us in the comments. Your story matters, and we read every word. Valentina stirred her coffee, watching the foam swirl in slow circles. Nathaniel had said something the night before that refused to let her sleep. I haven't felt this alive in years. It wasn't flattery. It was a confession, one that had opened a door she wasn't sure she was ready to walk through. Her heart wanted to believe him. Her history didn't. She wasn't afraid of hard work, or motherhood, or even falling in love. She was afraid of being someone's project, afraid of being pitied, packaged, protected, and then placed aside. She had worked too hard to regain control of her life. She wasn't about to hand the reins to a man, even a kind one. The last few weeks had been beautiful, but also dangerous. It felt easy. It felt right, and that scared her. She found him in the nursery, humming a tune to Saul while Luna napped in his arms. Nathaniel, she said softly. He turned. I need to ask you something. And I want the truth, even if it's ugly. He nodded. Do you see me as someone to save? He froze. The air between them tightened. No, he said quietly. I see you as someone who saved me. He placed Luna down and stepped closer, his voice low but steady. When I first met you, I thought I was helping. I thought it would be about giving you a room, a doctor, a warm place to land. He paused. But that first night, when you told me their names, when I saw the way you held them, even while you were in pain, I realized you didn't need saving. You just needed a moment to breathe. She stayed silent, letting him speak. You reminded me that humanity isn't weakness, that control isn't power, that vulnerability can be strength. He reached into his jacket pocket. Not with a flourish, not on one knee. He simply held the small box between them. I bought this the day after I watched you knead bread in the kitchen like it was prayer. He opened it. A diamond, simple and set in gold, surrounded by 2 amber stones, one on each side. I'm not offering this as a rescue. He looked directly into her eyes. I'm offering it because I want to build with you, not just raise children or share bills, but wake up beside you with purpose. Grow, learn, be better, together. She blinked slowly, tears catching on her lashes. You say this isn't about pity, but you don't even know the whole of me. Nathaniel met her gaze, calm but unwavering. Then let me earn my place in your life, not by giving you things, but by standing beside you. Not out of obligation, but because I choose to. Valentina exhaled, a long breath that seemed to carry years of strain. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached up and unfastened the silver locket around her neck. She opened it. Inside were 2 photos, one of a young man with her eyes and slender features, and the other of an older gentleman in a tweed suit. My father, my brother. They were good men, but they were proud. Too proud to ever ask for help. Nathaniel leaned in, listening. And you? I'm learning, she said, voice fragile but certain, that there's strength in accepting love too. There was a long pause before either of them spoke again. People will talk, Valentina said quietly. They'll say I trapped you, that I used my situation, the babies, the history between our families. They'll say things no matter what, he answered. But I know the truth, and so will Luna and Saul, that we chose each other, not because we had to, but because we saw something the world didn't. Her chin dipped, uncertain. He added, let them talk. We'll be too busy building something real. She looked up then, really looked at him. What she saw wasn't a man offering her salvation. It was someone offering her partnership. Steadiness, a mirror that reflected not just who she was, but who she could be, fully seen. I don't want a fairy tale, she murmured. This isn't one, he said. This is something better. This is life, with all its scars and second chances. She closed the locket gently, the small click echoing like punctuation in the silence. Then she nodded once, a motion as deliberate and strong as a vow. Nathaniel reached for her hand. No more maybes, he whispered. Only yes, only forward. Valentina allowed herself to lean against him, not from weakness, but from a willingness to share the weight. Outside the windows, the city blinked with life. Somewhere far below, the hotel lobby buzzed with the usual luxury, unaware of the quiet revolution unfolding in the suite above. Inside, 2 people were rewriting the ending they never expected to begin again. Their story wasn't neat or glossy. It was real, and it was just getting started. They sat together on the edge of the sofa, surrounded by the hush that followed heavy conversations. The twins stirred quietly in their bassinet, the only soundtrack to the stillness. Nathaniel looked down at the ring still in his hand. I meant to do this on one knee, he said with a half smile, but somehow, this moment feels better standing side by side. Valentina reached out slowly and touched the velvet box, fingers grazing it like it held a fragile truth. You didn't have to buy anything for me to say yes. I didn't buy it because I had to, he said gently. I bought it because I wanted you to have something that reflects what I see in you. Strength, elegance, depth. He opened the box again. She didn't even look at the diamond this time. She looked at him. If I put this on, she said quietly, we can't go backward. There's no pretending it was a phase or a kind gesture. It means we're building something permanent. That's all I want, he answered. Valentina took the ring in her hand. It was warm from being held. Not just for the children. Not just for the children, he echoed, but especially for them. Because if we're building a home, I want it to be a place where they never question their worth, never have to wonder if love is conditional. I want them to grow up watching what respect looks like, what partnership feels like. Her hand trembled as she slipped the ring on. It fit without resistance, as if it had been made with her finger in mind. The moments stretched. She exhaled. I need to go slow, she said. I need space to keep becoming who I am. I need to be equal in this. Nathaniel didn't hesitate. Then that's how we'll do it. We'll make this ours, on our terms. No performances, no perfection. Just real life. Shared. They didn't kiss. They didn't cry. They sat there, eyes locked, with the kind of peace that comes from knowing you've chosen something true. A few minutes later, the twins began to fuss. Valentina moved to pick them up, but Nathaniel was already ahead of her. He gently scooped Luna into one arm, Saul into the other, and cradled them with surprising ease. You know, he said, glancing at the babies, I've reviewed 1,000. Contracts, brokered mergers, made decisions that affected empires. But this. She stood beside him, one hand resting lightly on his arm. This is the only decision that's ever made me feel like a whole man. She rested her head lightly against his shoulder. And just like that, the proposal wasn't about rings or promises. It became about choosing. Every day, choosing each other, and choosing to lead with love instead of fear. Their new life wouldn't be without challenges, but they were already standing in the middle of their first answer to adversity. Not apart, not alone, but together. There was no grandeur in the guest list, only meaning. No towering floral arches or celebrity performers. Just sincerity, just presence. Just people whose hands had held trembling moments and turned them into safety. The ballroom of the Grandview Plaza had seen 1,000 events, but nothing quite like this. It had hosted world leaders, luxury brand launches, champagne-soaked galas. But today, it bore witness to something quieter and far more sacred. Ricardo adjusted his tie for the 3rd time, standing near the door. His eyes weren't just glassy, they shimmered. He had escorted CEOs, actors, ambassadors, but never a bride whose first step into the hotel was taken in desperation. With soaked clothes and contractions tearing through her spine. He had opened the door for her once. Now, he would walk her down the aisle. Beside him, Carmen checked on the twins. Luna and Saul had their own custom-made cradle near the front row, nestled between. White silk pillows and golden fleece blankets, gifts from the hotel staff. Carmen cooed at them, proud and protective. She wasn't just the paramedic who caught their first cries. She was family now. Valentina stood in the dressing suite, once reserved for celebrity clientele, now quiet, still. She wore a gown she had stitched herself during late-night feedings. Every thread held a moment, a worry, a memory, a hope. It was simple, soft, and more graceful than anything haute couture could create. She looked into the mirror, but she wasn't seeing her reflection. She was seeing her life, every jagged chapter that had led to this one. Her breath caught, not in fear, in awe. Miranda entered gently, holding a small velvet pouch. Something borrowed, she whispered with a gentle smile. It belonged to his mother. Inside, a gold locket with an engraving. Love is the only empire that leaves no orphans. Valentina's hands trembled as she pinned it into the folds of her dress. She heard the strings begin outside. The aisle wasn't long, but every step would carry her across lifetimes. As she emerged, holding Ricardo's arm, all sound fell away, not because it went silent, but because everything else faded into insignificance. Nathaniel stood at the altar, wearing a tailored suit that barely held in the storm of emotion inside him. The man who once lived by schedules and bottom lines now felt time halt as he watched. The woman who had undone everything he thought he knew about love, family, and fortune. He saw not just a bride. He saw the night that changed him. He saw the moment she looked up from the hotel chair and met his eyes. He saw the twin hearts she had brought into the world. He saw the way she refused to let her dignity be broken, even in the most desperate hour. And when she reached him, he didn't take her hand like it was fragile. He held it like it was the only steady thing in the world. The officiant's words were brief, because what needed to be said had already been spoken in quiet nights, in whispered stories, in late feeds and soft laughter when the world was asleep. Valentina turned to face him, eyes glistening. When I walked into this building, I didn't know if I would make it through the night I had. Nothing but 2 heartbeats inside me and a hope that someone, somewhere, might see me. You did. Before anything changed, before anything was explained, you saw me. I wasn't invisible to you. Nathaniel's voice broke slightly when he spoke. You brought light into the one place I had kept locked away. My heart wasn't empty. It was waiting. For you, for Luna and Saul, for meaning. Soft sniffles scattered across the room. Saul stirred gently in Carmen's arms. Luna blinked awake. It was as if they were listening. The officiant smiled. Do you vow before this community to build a life not out of perfection, but persistence, not out of comfort, but commitment? Yes, they both said. The rings were passed from hand to hand. Simple, symbolic, nothing showy, everything sacred. As he slid hers on, he whispered words just for her. Because I haven't felt this alive in years. And when she slid his on, her voice quivered. Because you never asked me to be less, even when the world already had. They kissed, and the ballroom, used to applause, stood still in silence, because no cheer could match the quiet beauty of witnessing something whole being born from something once broken. After the ceremony, there was no chaotic bustle or overproduced reception, just candlelight, warmth, and the soft hum of conversation. The ballroom had been reset with intimate round tables dressed in ivory linen and lined with chairs that now held people whose lives had unknowingly intertwined through one impossible night. In the corner, a quiet piano played. No lyrics, no spotlight, just sound, gentle, honest, filling in the spaces between laughter and tears. Carmen rocked Luna while Saul was passed between 3 hotel staff members, all vying for turns. Every single person who had been present that night, Ricardo, Carmen, Miranda, the night manager, even the housekeepers who fetched towels, was invited, not just as guests, but as witnesses to what they'd helped build. Nathaniel pulled Valentina aside for a moment. Come with me, he whispered. She raised an eyebrow, curious but trusting. He led her to the elevator, the same one they had taken to the presidential suite that night. It was no longer a suite for VIPs or corporate clients. After the birth, after that sleepless sacred night, Nathaniel had quietly taken it off the general booking list. It belonged to no one but them. When they stepped inside, it hadn't changed much. The curtains were open, revealing the skyline bathed in gold. On one side, 2 bassinets had been placed gently, waiting. On the other, a framed photo sat on the desk, Valentina holding the twins. For the first time, her hair damp, her expression exhausted but radiant, Nathaniel spoke quietly. I wanted this to be part of today, not for show, not for sentiment, but because this is where our family began. Valentina took a slow breath, not with perfection, but with pain. And still, he replied, it was the best night of my life. They sat down on the same velvet couch where she'd first rested after arriving. Nathaniel reached into a drawer and pulled out an envelope. What's this? She asked. It's not another proposal, just the future. Inside was the first draft of a property deed for a space on the corner of 8th and Lytton. One Valentina had passed every day on her bakery commute before she lost everything. I remembered you said it used to be your dream, he said. Now it's ours. It'll be Luna and Saul's first real home outside these walls. Her fingers trembled holding it. You really remember everything, don't you? I only remember what matters. Below the deed, a smaller note sat handwritten in ink. No one saves anyone alone, but we all need someone who sees us. You saw me too. She closed the envelope, leaned into him and whispered, we keep building. 5 years later, Grandview Plaza wasn't just a hotel. It had become something else entirely. It was still opulent, still a landmark, still the centerpiece of a skyline that glittered at night. But to those who knew what had happened there, it was more than marble floors and polished brass. It was home. Downstairs, in the sunlit corner of the building where a clothing boutique once stood, the warm scent of cinnamon and fresh sourdough filled the air. A soft bell above the door rang as customers came and went, each one welcomed by the same calm voice, the same amber eyes. Welcome to Luna Soul Artisan Breads, Valentina would say, hands powdered. In flour, apron tied snugly around her waist, smile worn effortlessly. She had started the bakery with 1 oven and 2 babies napping in a portable crib in the back. Today, it was a thriving business, a cornerstone of the community, but its most meaningful success wasn't in its profits. It was in the people behind the counter. Every barista, every baker, every delivery driver was someone who had once been overlooked, once without shelter, once told they had nothing to offer. Now they had jobs, skills, confidence, dignity. It had started with one woman offering bread to those who'd never tasted kindness warm from the oven. And it became a movement, The hotel above had embraced the story. What had once been a luxury tower built to keep people out had opened its arms. Ricardo, now the head of guest services, made sure of that. No one was forgotten. No one was ignored. And no one, no matter how they looked or what they carried, was turned away without a second look. What had happened that night 5 years ago wasn't just a miracle. It had been a turning point. Upstairs, the presidential suite had changed too. Not in design, it was still elegant, still the crown jewel of the building, but it no longer booked guests. It no longer hosted dignitaries. Because it wasn't a hotel room anymore. It was theirs. Valentina and Nathaniel had made it a home, not because they needed the space, but because it held their history. That room wasn't just where the twins were born. It was where trust was planted, where wounds began to close, where love was spoken aloud in the hush of early morning. On the wall of the nursery, now transformed into Luna and Sol's shared bedroom, were hand-drawn stars and a hand-painted sun. Luna's name shimmered above her bed in gold. Sol's in bold navy. In between was a framed quote that Valentina had found in an old notebook. The brightest moments often begin in the darkest places. The twins, now 5, were different in nearly every way. Luna was gentle, curious, and drawn to colors. She painted with a patience that belonged to someone much older. She liked silence. She liked asking deep questions. She once asked her father, "Why do people look away from others who are hurting?" And Nathaniel hadn't known what to say. Sol, by contrast, had energy that could not be contained. He raced through hallways, barged into meetings, and had an uncanny ability to negotiate snacks before dinner. But there was wisdom in him, too, like the time he insisted they bring extra sandwiches to the park just in case someone was hungry. They were two halves of the same heartbeat. Luna, with her quiet compassion. Sol, with his loud love. Together, they reminded Valentina and Nathaniel of everything good that had come from a single yes. Once a year, on the anniversary of that night, the 4 of them would do the same thing. They would light a candle, order room service, pull out the same old blanket they'd used when Valentina was first brought upstairs. And they would sit together on the floor of the suite, no shoes, no titles, just family. That night had become sacred, not in a formal way, but in the way families have traditions that no one else understands. And always, always, Luna would ask the same thing. "Papa, can you tell us a story again?" 5 years had passed, but the suite still held the warmth of that night. Not the pain, not the fear, but the spark, the beginning of something none of them could have foreseen. Now the presidential suite wasn't just a story to whisper about, it was home. The room where Luna had let out her first breath and Sol had arrived with that thunderous cry was now filled with laughter, crayon, marks on coffee table books, and a scent of fresh bread that clung to Valentina's clothes when she came upstairs from the bakery. Downstairs, Luna and Sol Artisan Breads was more than a storefront. It was a promise kept. Valentina's dream had come alive on the very foundation where she'd once been seen as out of place. She employed mothers in transition, survivors of homelessness and hardship. Women with stories as fierce and unfinished as hers once was. They didn't just learn to bake, they learned to stand. Ricardo, now head of guest services, stopped by the bakery every morning to pick up a warm loaf. He insisted they named a sourdough after him. Carmen, who had become Luna and Sol's godmother, hosted CPR classes in the back kitchen every quarter because, she said, you never know who's going to show up needing a miracle. And every year, on the same night she walked through those revolving doors, Valentina returned to the suite with her family. They didn't treat it like a holiday. It wasn't a party. It was more like a stillness, a space to remember how close things had come to going another way, a time to give thanks for a single yes in the face of every no. On the 5th anniversary, Sol had fallen asleep early with a toy spatula in his hand, while Luna curled beside her father with a book she insisted on pretending to read. "Papa," she whispered, nudging his arm, "tell us the story again." Nathaniel turned to Valentina, who was watching them from the corner chair with a softness he'd come to recognize as her joy. She nodded. It was their tradition now. "All right," he said, pulling Luna close and kissing the top of her head. "Once there was a night that changed everything, not because of what was planned, but because everything fell apart. And sometimes, when everything falls apart, the best things fall into place." Luna, eyes wide, waited. She loved this part. "There was a woman," he continued, "stronger than anyone I'd ever met. She didn't have a home that night. But she had something better, courage. She came here with nothing but her strength, and you two growing inside her. And I was here, but I wasn't really living. Until I saw her. And then you helped her? Luna whispered. I did, but here's the secret, little light. She helped me more. He looked over at Valentina, who had tears in her eyes. Not because the memory was painful, but because it was still powerful. The truth is, he said, I thought I was building an empire. I thought I had it all, but I didn't know what everything really meant. Until your mom showed me. Luna leaned into his chest. Did you love her right away? Nathaniel smiled. I think my heart knew before I did. They stayed like that a while, one child asleep, the other holding the thread of a story that had stitched their family together. Outside, the city pulsed quietly. Inside, the sweet, breathed peace. It wasn't just a luxury hotel anymore. It was the first place that had ever made Valentina feel visible. The place where Nathaniel had become more than a title. Where Luna and Saul had arrived, unexpected and undeniable, rewriting the future in their very first breaths. This wasn't a return. It was a reminder that home isn't always where we're from. Sometimes it's where we choose to stay. Sometimes it's where someone chooses us. And as the lights dimmed and the stories faded into silence, Valentina closed her eyes with one thought on her mind. She had come looking for shelter. What she found was everything. 5 years later, the Grandview Plaza was no longer just a symbol of elegance and prestige. It had become a quiet monument to a moment that had changed lives, not just for a young woman who once walked in seeking refuge, but for a man who thought he had everything, only to realize he had nothing without someone to share it with. In that same building, on the same marble floors, people still checked in expecting luxury. But those who stayed long enough began to notice something else. A quiet kindness threaded its way through the service. Staff held the doors open not just out of duty, but because they cared. Welcome letters came with handwritten notes. Families found cribs already placed in their suites when reservations mentioned infants. And near the elevators, a bronze plaque now read, "This building once held a moment of mercy that changed everything, dedicated to the power of compassion." The moment Valentina had walked through the lobby doors, she never imagined. She'd one day co-chair a foundation changing thousands of lives. Yet here she was. The Sterling Foundation, founded 6 months after Luna and Saul's birth, had begun with a simple mission to ensure that no woman in crisis would ever again feel invisible. What started with emergency housing grants quickly evolved into a multi-tiered support system. Childcare stipends, job training, transportation services, and long-term mentorship programs. 12 cities had welcomed the foundation's chapters, and in each, a quote from Valentina was painted above the entrance. Compassion is never a weakness. Sometimes it's the strongest thing you can offer. Each ribbon cutting brought her to tears, not from pride, but from memory. Because every woman she met reminded her of who she had once been, overlooked, overworked, and utterly out of options. The foundation's impact wasn't measured in numbers alone. It was in the confidence of a mother walking into her first job interview after years on the street. It was in a child hugging their mom after months of instability. It was in the way survivors became mentors for the next group of arrivals, creating a ripple that extended far beyond what anyone could trace. And leading every single program was a value etched into the hearts of both founders: dignity first. No handouts, no pity, only partnership, guidance, and a reminder that everyone deserves a second chance. By the age of 5, Luna and Saul were already known around the hotel. They called the Grandview our big house and treated every staff member like family. Luna, soft-spoken and thoughtful, had an eye for design. She often followed her mother into the bakery, asking questions about color, shape, and flavor. She was curious in quiet ways, the kind of child who didn't speak often, but when she did, the words landed. Saul, on the other hand, was a storm of energy. He had his father's leadership instincts and his mother's charm. At just 5, he was already trying to train the hotel staff by handing out clipboards and instructing bellhops on how to smile better. The children weren't spoiled by privilege. Valentina and Nathaniel were deliberate about that. They knew that their beginnings held more value than any inheritance could. And so, Luna and Saul spent their Saturdays visiting foundation shelters, reading books to other kids, helping decorate cupcakes, or helping their mother stack gift boxes for outreach programs. One day, Saul asked, "Why do we do this every weekend, Mama?" Valentina knelt to meet his eyes and said, "Because once, someone opened a door for us, and we promised we'd open it for others too. Luna placed her hand in her mother's. So we're the helpers now. Nathaniel, listening from the doorway, felt his chest swell. They were growing up with the values that had rebuilt his life from the inside out. Some stories fade into memories, but the people who change your life, they stay. Ricardo had been offered a regional management role after his story went viral through the Foundation's first documentary, but he declined it. "My post is here," he said simply. "This lobby is where I found purpose." He remained at the Grandview Plaza, eventually becoming head of guest experience. But to Luna and Saul, he was simply Uncle Ricky. Every Christmas, he arrived with hand-carved ornaments for the twins, each one shaped like something meaningful from their birth story. Carmen, too, never strayed far. She continued working in emergency medicine, but she now volunteered as the Foundation's medical advisor. She offered health workshops, trained volunteers, and even developed a small crisis care unit inside one of the new centers. On Luna and Saul's birthdays, she showed up with cupcakes and glitter hats. They called her Godmama Carr, a name that stuck more stubbornly than any title on a business card. The once strangers who'd formed a circle in crisis had become family, not through blood, but through choice. The presidential suite had long since been retired from regular bookings. After all, it was no longer a suite. It was now the Sterling family's permanent residence. They had redesigned the space with warmth and purpose. The room where Valentina gave birth was now a cozy library, lined with shelves filled with both business books and children's storybooks. A mural stretched across the back wall, painted by a local artist who had once stayed at the shelter. It depicted a woman holding two babies, standing in front of tall glass doors with light pouring through them. Every anniversary of that night, the family would return to one simple ritual. They'd bake something special together in the bakery downstairs, Luna choosing the icing color, Saul handling the sprinkles, Nathaniel watching as flour dusted Valentina's eyelashes. Then, as evening fell, they'd carry the treats upstairs, light a single candle, and sit on the floor of the suite where it had all begun. "Tell us the story again, Papa," Luna would whisper. And Nathaniel would begin, not from the beginning, but from the moment Valentina walked through the door. He told it like a sacred tale, because to them it was, not just a story about birth or shelter or coincidence, but about how sometimes life hands you an open door just when you're sure they've all closed. He always ended the same way. You weren't born in a hospital. You were born in a moment of courage. You were born into love, before we even had words for it. And the twins would curl up beside him, safe in the knowledge that their beginning wasn't defined by fear, but by people who chose kindness. Years later, when a journalist asked Valentina what she would want, people to learn from her story, she answered without hesitation, that help shouldn't depend on worthiness, that love is strongest when it's unexpected, and that sometimes the person you help ends up helping you even more. Nathaniel, sitting beside her, reached for her hand. They had built a marriage not on rescue, but on reciprocity. She had shown him how to feel again. He had given her space to stand tall. Together, they had rewritten a story that once felt like the end into something far more enduring. Their lives had not been perfect. There had been nights of no sleep, hard business decisions, and moments of old fears resurfacing. But through it all, they held on to one truth. The most meaningful happily ever after isn't about avoiding storms, but finding someone to weather them with. That truth became the Foundation's motto. It was etched onto every plaque, every welcome packet, every staff badge. And one day, when Luna and Saul were old enough to take the mantle, it would be passed down to them, not as pressure, but as inheritance of the heart. Because their family wasn't built on legacy. It was built on love, on mercy, on a single moment of courage that sparked a lifetime of change.